Hey everyone, I hope you're well. So last week on Friday, I wasn't able to do a live stream as normal because I just got hit with a tsunami of life admin. Very, very boring, but I wasn't able to join you for a live. So I thought by way of some small recompense, I'd do a short Q&A video with some questions that some of you have been kind enough to send in. So as usual, I'll read out the name of the handle of the person who sent in the question and usually mispronounce it really badly and their question, and then see if I can give a sort of semi-coherent answer. How does that sound? Okay, great. All right. First question comes from Adityad 05. Told you I'd mangle the handle. Top 5 long-term altcoin picks. Okay, all right. Well, I'm going to start this off with 2 disclaimers. Not one, but 2 disclaimers. 1, not financial advice. 2, if you hadn't noticed already, we're in a bear market. So, I personally have not really been buying anything recently other than a little bit of BTC and ETH here and there. So I'm not convinced this is an altcoin buying environment, but that's a decision that only you can make for yourself. So do bear those in mind. Okay, I think my first altcoin that I'm interested in, I don't actually own any of this at the moment, but I am looking at it, is Aave, the #1 DeFi protocol. I did a review of it very recently over on our main channel. It's an amazing project and it has got so much in the works at the moment, including, of course, Lens protocol, this decentralized social media project, which I think has the potential to be a real disruptor. So for that and many other reasons, I think Aave is, it's certainly a coin that I'm watching very, very closely. So that's Aave. Another altcoin for a long-term hold is Atom, Cosmos's Atom. Like I've said many, many times before, interoperability is a huge part of crypto's future. The future is not single chain, it is multi-chain, and I think interoperability projects like Cosmos and also Polkadot, which is very, very similar to Cosmos, I think those are both really, really good long-term projects, and that's why I think Atom and also DOT are good altcoins to hold for the long term, and also good Ethereum hedges as well. Although, they're slightly different projects. They work in a slightly different way to Ethereum, but nevertheless. Okay, the next one I think is a good long-term hold is Arweave. Now, a lot has happened to Arweave recently. There have been a few changes. Obviously, Arweave is no longer storing all of Solana's blockchain data, which is a big shame, but I still think the project has a lot of long-term potential. And again, I think Arweave's use case is so strong. This idea of being able to store data immutably in a decentralized fashion, I think that is only going to get more and more important as we go along. And I think Arweave is a great project, really, really interesting. What was the other one? Yes, Thorchain I think is great as well. Again, I think with all the regulations that we have incoming, Thorchain is going to play a more and more important role. It's a big cornerstone of, or it's going to be, I think, a cornerstone of the DeFi ecosystem in the future. So I think Rune is a really, really good altcoin to hold, again, long term. And finally, another project which, it's had a bit of a bumpy ride recently, but in terms of use case, I think there are few better than Helium and its HNT coin, because I think if Helium can get its vision of peer-to-peer broadband, peer-to-peer internet working, it will, get it more adopted across the world, then I think that could seriously be a massive, massive game changer. So for that reason, I'm bullish on HNT too. So there are 5 altcoins to hold for the long term, but remember my disclaimers at the start, not financial advice, among other things. Okay. PM Oliveras says, what other macro factors to pay attention to besides inflation? Where do you start? Obviously inflation, and in particular the Federal Reserve's response to it, not just the Fed, obviously, central banks around the world, but the Fed is the one that everyone kind of watches. That means that inflation is obviously the big kind of macro factor that has been affecting crypto prices, stock prices, all sorts of prices recently, really. But there's a lot of other stuff going on besides inflation. Some of these other macro factors kind of feed into inflation, things like rising energy costs, rising food costs. They're, I think, very much a part of the inflation equation. So these things are kind of all interlinked. But I think other macro factors to watch out for are continuing problems with supply chains. Now, obviously, supply chain problems, again, they feed into inflation as well, but they have a real effect on companies' bottom lines and just on global trade in general. And if you've been following the story of Tesla selling off 75% of its BTC, that is in large part due to supply chain problems. Basically, it can't get its cars manufactured quick enough. It's having all sorts of problems with distribution. This opens up serious liquidity problems, serious cash flow problems, and that is the reason that certainly Elon said that Tesla sold so much of its BTC. So supply chains are a big macro factor to keep an eye on. What else? War, unfortunately, the war in Ukraine is still raging, and I don't see any end to that soon. There's also the prospect of China invading Taiwan. Now, to some, this may sound alarmist, but this is a concern that just will not go away, and I think it's something that we need to keep a very close eye on and factor in to, I think, probably the longer term macro outlook, but it's we never quite know what could happen, especially with a situation as potentially volatile as that. So war is another big macro factor to keep an eye on as well. And I think as well, kind of again, sort of joined up with war is just political upheaval. We've seen so much happening over the last few years. COVID and all of the kind of lockdowns and restrictions has disrupted global politics to such an extent, and I think that is going to play out more and more over the rest of this year and coming years as well, especially in places like Europe. I think we're going to see possibly, a real kind of 180 with a lot of countries' political systems, maybe switching, maybe going sort of from right to left or from left to right. I think we could see more extremist politics, perhaps from both ends, creep in. And I think that is going to have a big effect on the long-term macro picture as well. So political upheaval. And I think a possible white swan, basically all these things I've talked about are bad news, aren't they? A potential white swan, which must surely be on the horizon at some point, is the World Health Organization declaring that the COVID pandemic is over. I've speculated about this a few times. We don't seem to be there yet, but obviously that is something that could have a big, I think, fairly short-term effect on the global economy. But certainly if the WHO was to come out and say the COVID pandemic we are no longer in a pandemic, that would certainly give markets probably only a brief boost, but hey, we'll take anything, right? Okay, next question comes from Corona Extra 98. Hopefully not that sort of corona. Likelihood of a sizable amount of Bitcoin being lost due to a lack of holding knowledge. Okay, I'm assuming this kind of refers to a lack of, as in people basically losing access to their Bitcoin, because I mean this is a real fact. People talk about the 21 million BTC limit without remembering a lot of the time that a lot of BTC has been lost for various reasons. Now, there's obviously 1 million BTC around that sitting in the Genesis wallet controlled by Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, I think generally the consensus is that is probably not going anywhere anytime soon. But there are also hundreds of thousands, some would say even millions of BTC that have been accidentally buried on hard drives in landfill. Something happening here in the UK, an ongoing story here. People just generally throwing out old hard drives, forgetting they had BTC on them, losing access to them, people losing access to their wallets. So yeah, a lot of BTC has been lost due to people basically, not knowing how to hold on to their keys. So I presume that's kind of what that question is all about, or people or maybe just people having paper hands and selling too quickly. Okay. TH Mancini says, reasons for this Matic pump and what we can expect in the future. Yes, Matic has. Well, we've seen the market in general pump a bit over the last few days, and then retrace a little bit. But Matic has been particularly noticeable in that regard. So I think there are a couple of reasons why Matic has pumped recently. One is the fact that it's managed to attract a lot of developers from Terra's ecosystem. A lot of the projects that were building on Terra have been lured over to Polygon. Basically, Polygon has deployed a fairly big developer fund to get some of these, in some cases, really cool projects to migrate over to Polygon instead, because Terra is dead. We've also got, there was also the news of Polygon partnering with Disney as well, which I think gave it a bit of a short-term bump too. So there's obviously a lot of development happening in Polygon's ecosystem. And of course, we've had all this good news around Ethereum's merge as well, which I think kind of filters through to layer 2 tokens like Polygon. Now, what does the future hold? Well, basically a lot of Polygon's development has been funded by sales of the Matic token. This is something I've pointed out a few times before. It is something to be wary of. Now, if I remember rightly, the last Matic vesting cliff was back in April this year. I think the next one is in October this year. Anyhow, you can check that for yourselves. But yeah, that's something definitely to be aware of. There is a lot of Matic selling going on in order to fund Polygon's development, both from the Polygon Foundation, selling from the Polygon Foundation, and also from early investors as well. And early investors who are certainly still in profit, even though this is a bear market, a lot of them will be looking to release some liquidity when that next tranche of Matic vests. So do be aware of that. Lots of potential sell pressure ahead. Okay, next question. What have we got? Magical CB asks, what would happen if the UK adopted BTC as legal tender? Wow. Well, for one thing, I would be absolutely over the moon. For another thing, there would be absolute pandemonium in the British media and elsewhere. I mean, this would be really, really big news. BTC, I think news like that, even in a bear market, that would see one heck of a pump for BTC and probably the rest of the crypto market by extension. Longer term, it's harder to say. I mean, it's such a bold move for a big developed economy like the UK's to take that I find it kind of, I don't think it's likely anytime soon, although I think it would be amazing. The only real examples we have to look to at the moment are obviously El Salvador and the Central African Republic, who are still kind of not very far along in their sort of Bitcoin as legal tender journey. So it's really difficult to speculate beyond that sort of initial pandemonium. But I think in the long term, Britain would benefit amazingly from having reserves of proven hard money, and I think it would certainly accelerate the adoption of BTC across the rest of the world as well. So it would be pretty damn good news. But I think we could be away from that yet. However, if Rishi Sunak is watching and he does indeed end up as the next Prime Minister, think on, Rishi. Okay, Derm.Keen says, listen to my band, The Pretzels. Well, Derm, that is a great name for a band. I'll give you that. Yeah, okay. Are you on Spotify, Bandcamp? Where can I find you? I will have a look, and I will indeed have a listen to the Pretzels. Okay. Tuxedo Man 07 says, what do you think Satoshi would say when asked about Bitcoin maxis? Wow, that's a great question. Wow. Well, okay. So, first off, I think I have to be very, very careful about putting words into the mouth of the great Satoshi. However, my guess is I think he would be they. I think Satoshi would be a little bemused by Bitcoin maxis. I get the impression that whoever they are a pretty sort of modest and kind of self-effacing person. Obviously, especially since they're this genius who's invented this amazing world-changing technology. I think probably, yeah, Satoshi would be a bit bemused by Bitcoin maxis. I think he'd admire them for their belief in Bitcoin above anything else. I mean, let's face it, I think Satoshi would probably be a Bitcoin maxi himself, although I think there's a good chance that he would be likely to see the benefits of certain other cryptocurrencies, perhaps Ethereum, for example. So it's very, very difficult to put words in. Well, it's impossible to put words into Satoshi's mouth, but I think probably a bit bemused by all the kind of Bitcoin maxi stuff. I don't think Satoshi would approve of the toxic maximalism that we see, but yeah, I think they'd certainly be interested at what they'd unleashed. Okay, M.R. Afsahi 1994 asks, is bear market over? No. I wish I had better news for you. No, the bear market is not over. Be wary of these sort of short-term pumps. Crypto can still pump, but I think it will continue to dump afterwards. It's going to be very, very rocky for the next few months and possibly the next year or so. I personally am kind of looking to 2024 as when the bear market will end because, well, those macro factors that I was talking about earlier on, they are what are ultimately driving cryptocurrency prices, and I don't see an end to them anytime soon. So bear market not over. Not for a while. Crypto Decoding asks, your advice to new crypto content creators. Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll start this one with a disclaimer. If Crypto Decoding, if you become the biggest crypto influencer in the space, partly because of this advice that I'm about to give you, I want a credit, okay? So, my advice to new crypto content creators, I think, first of all, remember where you stand. Remember your sense of purpose. Remember your morals. You shouldn't be here just to shill altcoins to people, to shill shit coins, to talk about meme coins all the time. I think you should stay true to what you believe. You should talk about the technology. You should talk about the benefits that cryptocurrency offers. You can talk about all the amazing things that crypto lets you do, as well as make money by speculating on the price of coins and tokens. So I think you should stay true to your beliefs. And I hope those are your beliefs. In kind of more prosaic terms, I guess you need to be constant. You need to be posting, not all the time, but regularly. You need to make sure that you do as much research as you possibly can. You need to keep the quality of your posts as high as they can be, but also be mindful that you need to post regularly. That is just a part of being any content creator, I think. Be yourself, I guess. I don't know what your particular style is. I don't know how you come across, but you will have a particular selling point, something that you do better than anyone else, something that endears you to people in a particular way. And I think look out for that and play on that, and try and make your love for your subject shine through. That's what I try to do anyway. Whether or not I succeed, I don't know. Okay. Carlos Red 17 asks, can BTC actually rally, in brackets big, with all macro aspects still grim? I mean, it was made to counter that, but yeah, a good question related to what I was talking about with the bear market and obviously these macro factors moving the crypto market as well. Can BTC rally big with the wider economic outlook so grim? I don't think so. Now, I've talked a lot before about how we need to see some sort of resolution to the macro factors that are driving the market before I think we can really even entertain the idea of a bull market again. So things like an end to the pandemic, an end or at least some sort of resolution to the war in Ukraine, which would allow for, you would hope, sort of food exports, energy exports to resume, some sort of resolution, and that is really difficult to countenance at the moment, because we have Russia on one side and Europe and the USA on the other, and I can't see anyone moving on that position. And in fact, I can see that conflict getting a lot worse before it gets any better, which is pretty grim news. we could certainly see supply chains ease up as COVID restrictions are eased. That very much depends a lot on China. Will it stop locking down whenever just a single case of COVID is detected? And you get whole cities like Shanghai locked down for weeks on end as a result. If China can stop doing that and the global supply chains can start flowing a bit more freely, then that could contribute to a better economic outlook. And obviously, any indication that the Fed's monetary policy and also the monetary policies of other central banks, whether those policies are actually working, are higher interest rates working to bring down inflation? Because if they are, then that is certainly a sign that the worst may be over in that respect. But there's a lot that needs to go right, I think, before we can see a big rally in Bitcoin, in crypto, in stocks, in everything. And let's face it, nothing is ever quite so black and white, is it? Because, okay, some of these problems may be resolved, but of course, new problems spring up to take their place. That is very much the nature of the beast. That's the way the world tends to work. So, a few years down the line, we probably moved on from a lot of these problems and be faced with a whole load of new ones as well. And of course, there are ongoing problems that, let's face it, aren't going to go away anytime soon. Things like climate change, global uncertainty, things like that. So, yeah, I think I don't see any sort of meaningful rally until at least the global macro situation has improved in some of those ways that I outlined. Blamen 2001, I hope I pronounced that right, probably not. How did you first hear about crypto? I've said a few times actually. I walked into back in the day, back in around sort of 2013. I was living in East London, and I walked into this very sort of big, quite cool pub called the Pembury Tavern, which is in Hackney. And I walked in, and there was a sign up saying, "We accept Bitcoin." And that, to my memory, is my first ever. That was the first time I kind of heard about it. The first time it really registered with me. And as I said, I went home after that and just fell down the rabbit hole. So yeah, this was kind of late 2013 in Hackney, East London. Happy days. Okay, last question. Hasidon Faz says, do you watch Netflix and Disney Plus? What type of shows do you like? I don't watch Disney. I've never watched Disney Plus, actually. I try to sort of, basically, every evening I come home, I usually do a bit of work and have something to eat, and then sometimes I'll read, but sometimes I will sit down in front of the TV and try and watch something on Netflix or HBO or something like that, and generally fall asleep pretty quickly. But a few shows that spring to mind, certainly on Netflix, Rick and Morty, I was a big fan of, absolutely love Rick and Morty. Another one that I really enjoyed and that I wish I'd been able to watch more of was Snowpiercer. Now, the premise for Snowpiercer is absolutely bonkers. Basically, the Earth has frozen over and the only humans that survive are on a train that's sort of circling the globe. It's just nuts, but it's a very entertaining show. My fiancée, unfortunately, is not a big fan, so we were able to watch the first series, and then when the second series came up, she was like, no, I'm not watching any more of that. So that was Snowpiercer. I also really enjoyed something called Anatomy of a Scandal, which is a great kind of legal drama, I think you'd call it, which was on Netflix recently. I think it may be a BBC production, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, Anatomy of a Scandal, that was brilliant. And also, of course, the Quadriga CX Jerry Cotton documentary, Trust No One, that was on Netflix. I really enjoyed that. I had a few gripes with that, but very, very entertaining nonetheless, even though I kind of knew the story. And also, I noticed something that was on Netflix recently, and that I actually had on DVD, so I've seen it before. But a great film is The Death of Stalin. That's one of my absolute favourites. It's by a chap called Armando Iannucci. He wrote and directed it. He made The Thick of It, the TV series, and also In the Loop, the film. An amazing, a genius, a comedy genius, Armando Iannucci. And The Death of Stalin is a really, really funny film with an amazing cast as well. So that is my recommendation. Okay, that's it for your questions. Thanks so much for sending them in, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please do send in more questions as they come to you, and I'll endeavour to answer them in future videos. But until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again very soon.